I remember the day everything changed as if it were yesterday. I was only 9 years old. I was sitting at our kitchen table, drawing something on the edge of an old notebook, while Mom and Dad sat across from me. Their faces were serious, tense, and that scared me. I had never seen Dad like that before. Usually, his eyes smiled, even when he was being serious. But that day, his smile was gone. Dad reached out his hand to me. It was slightly trembling, his usually confident fingers suddenly seeming weak. "Jennifer, sweetheart," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to tell you something important." Mom's eyes glistened, as if she was holding back tears. I didn't understand what was happening, but my heart was already sinking. Dad said a word that, at the time, sounded empty and meaningless to me: cancer. At 9 years old, I didn't know what that meant. But I understood enough to feel that our cozy little world was starting to crack at the seams. Over the next 2 years, our home stopped being the safe haven I had always known. It became a place filled with constant visitors, doctors, neighbors, relatives, sympathizers. Dad, once strong and cheerful, seemed more and more tired with each passing day. Mom tried to act like everything was normal, but nothing was the same. During the day, she smiled at me, trying to stay upbeat, but at night I heard her crying in their bedroom. I often sat outside the door, listening to her sobs, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. What could I say? How could I comfort her when I didn't even understand what was happening myself? When Dad died, I was 11. I hardly remember the funeral. It all blurred together into one dark haze: black clothes, hushed voices, the smell of wilted flowers. Mom held my hand so tightly it hurt. But I didn't complain. I thought we would get through it together, that now we had each other. I was wrong. A week after the funeral, Mom sat across from me again. This time, it was just the two of us. She spoke calmly, but her voice sounded strange, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. "Jennifer," she began, avoiding my gaze. "I've been talking to your grandmother. I think it would be best if you stayed with her for a while. Just until I figure everything out." "Why can't I stay here?" My voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. She looked away and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Normally, her gestures were warm, loving, but that day her hand felt distant. "I need some time alone, sweetheart," she said. "To think everything through, to figure out how to move forward." The next day, Grandma Margaret, Dad's mother, came to take me to her house. She barely said a word during the drive. Her lips were pressed tightly together, and her fingers gripped the steering wheel of her old car. When we arrived at her house, she helped me carry my bags into the guest room. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Life with Grandma was simple but peaceful. She cooked my favorite meals, told me stories about Dad when he was a boy, and helped me with my homework. But despite her efforts, it wasn't home. I kept waiting for Mom to call and tell me I could come back. Our phone calls were brief and monotonous. Every time, I asked when I could come home. And every time, Mom replied, "Just a little longer, sweetheart. Please be patient." Her voice was warm, but there was always a shadow of some strange fatigue that I couldn't understand. 6 months later, Mom finally came for me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, doing my homework, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Through the window, I saw her. She stepped out of an unfamiliar blue sedan. A man I had never seen before stayed in the driver's seat. Mom burst through the door with such enthusiasm that it seemed as though her once dimmed heart had suddenly come alive again. She looked different. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup flawless, and a new dress highlighted her fresh energy. Her eyes sparkled as if she was about to announce the happiest news of her life. "I have wonderful news," she exclaimed, her voice almost singing. Grandma appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyebrows arched slightly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Sarah, this is unexpected," she said dryly, casting a glance at Mom. Mom barely noticed. She walked over to me, grabbed my hands, and almost bouncing on her toes, continued. "Jennifer, sweetheart, I want you to meet someone special." I didn't even have time to ask anything before she added. "He's waiting in the car. He's a bit shy about coming in. But, guess what? I'm getting married." Mom's eyes shone with such joy that it seemed she was oblivious to everything around her. "His name is Robert. He's absolutely wonderful. A successful businessman. And he has 2 daughters, about your age. You'll have sisters, Jennifer. Isn't that amazing?" I glanced at Grandma, who remained rooted in place, as still as a statue. Her voice was even but cold. "Don't you think this is a bit sudden, Sarah?" Mom waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Oh, Margaret, when you meet him, you'll understand. He's perfect for us, for me, and for Jennifer." She turned back to me, her voice softening, almost pleading. "He'll be such a wonderful stepfather to you, sweetheart. And his daughters, Emma and Lisa, they're just lovely. Their mother passed away 3 years ago, and Robert has been raising them on his own. We'll be one big happy family. You understand, don't you?" I glanced out the window. Sitting in the blue sedan was a middle-aged man staring straight ahead. He didn't look around, didn't search for the house, didn't even glance in my direction. "Come on, Jennifer," Mom said, gripping my hands tighter. "Pack your things. The girls are waiting for you at home." On the drive, Mom talked incessantly. Her words flowed in a stream of cheerful plans, about the wedding, about how perfect everything would be, about Robert and his daughters. I stared out the window in silence, feeling a growing coldness spreading inside me. When we pulled up to the house Mom and Dad had bought together, I noticed 2 girls sitting on the porch. They looked like matching dolls, with identical blonde hair braided into pigtails and identical pink dresses. Mom waved at them and called out loudly, "Girls, come meet Jennifer." I stepped forward, trying to smile, but as soon as I opened my mouth, the taller girl interrupted me. "We know who you are." Her voice was sweet but cold. "Our dad told us everything." The younger one, Lisa, immediately chimed in. "Just so you know, he's not going to be your dad. He's our dad. And your mom is going to be our new mom." Emma smiled again, but her smile was empty, like that of a porcelain doll. "We're going to be one big happy family, right, Sarah?" "Of course, darling." Mom beamed, clearly oblivious to the tension. 3 months later, I stood in front of a mirror in a simple blue dress, getting ready for the wedding. Emma and Lisa darted around the room in matching pink bridesmaid dresses. I had overheard them loudly protesting when Mom suggested we wear matching outfits. "She's not even part of the family," Emma had said sharply, and Lisa nodded in agreement. In the official wedding photos, I was barely visible. Emma and Lisa had positioned themselves in such a way that their voluminous dresses blocked me from view. When I looked at those pictures later, a strange feeling crept over me. This wasn't the family Mom had promised. Life in our new blended family quickly settled into a routine. Robert was polite but barely acknowledged me. He would come home from work, hug his daughters, kiss Mom, and walk past me as if I were a piece of furniture. Mom, on the other hand, seemed determined to prove her devotion to the new family. She showered Emma and Lisa with attention, barely looking at me. Everything that came before seemed to have vanished, as if it had never existed at all. The first Christmas after the wedding made everything clear, like a harsh light exposing the truth. Emma and Lisa were radiant with excitement as they unwrapped expensive gifts, new iPads, designer clothes, jewelry that any girl their age would dream of receiving. I set off to the side, holding a basic phone and a couple of discount store sweaters Mom had handed me with an indifferent smile. "They're practical," she said, as if trying to justify the disparity. "That's what matters to you, right?" I thanked her, but inside, I felt a growing ache of loneliness. The only person who never forgot about me was Grandma Margaret. For my 13th birthday, she gave me a silver locket with a photo of Dad inside. I fastened it carefully around my neck, feeling the warmth of her gesture. That evening at dinner, Emma noticed the locket. "Oh, how pretty," she said, eyeing it with a hint of envy. "You should share it with me." "That's what sisters do." I refused. It was my locket, my memory of Dad, and I wasn't going to part with it. The next day, I found the locket's chain somehow broken. I didn't know how it had happened, but I immediately had my suspicions. Another time, Grandma sent me a set of expensive art supplies, knowing how much I loved to draw. Drawing was my little refuge, a place where I could forget everything else. But a week later, I found my sketchbooks soaked and my pencils snapped in half. When I confronted Lisa, she only laughed at my attempt to demand answers. "Prove it was me," she said, smiling sweetly, as if I'd accused her of something trivial. When I told Mom about it, she just sighed. "Jennifer, stop being so dramatic," she said tiredly. "You probably left them out in the rain. Stop blaming your sisters." I felt the wall between us grow taller and taller. This wasn't the family Mom had talked about. On my 15th birthday, Mom announced the news that would change everything even further. "I'm pregnant," she exclaimed, glowing with happiness. Robert smiled, his daughters squealed with excitement, anticipating the arrival of a baby brother or sister. I sat silently, feeling as though my place in this house had completely disappeared. In the spring, Michael was born, and the house was overtaken by the demands of a newborn. Mom's and Robert's attention now belonged entirely to him. 3 weeks after she returned from the hospital, the family gathered in the living room. Mom avoided meeting my eyes, and Robert cleared his throat before speaking. "We need to make some changes in the room arrangements. We think it would be best if you moved into Emma and Lisa's room. Michael will be in yours now." I felt the words burst out of me before I could stop them. "No!" I exclaimed, startled by the volume of my own voice. "I'm not sharing a room with them. That's my room. This is my father's house." The room fell silent. Mom stared at me as if she were hearing my voice for the first time. "What did you say?" she whispered. "Dad bought this house." I repeated, feeling bitterness rise within me. "He paid for it. You and Robert moved in, and now you want to take away the only thing I have left." Robert's face flushed red, and Emma and Lisa sat with their mouths agape. But it was Mom's words that hit the hardest. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling. "How can you be so selfish after everything we've done for you? Robert has been so kind to you, and this is how you repay him." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no joy in it. "Kind?" I whispered. "He doesn't even notice me." After that conversation, the house became a prison. No one spoke to me at the dinner table, and Mom and Robert acted as though I didn't exist. Even Emma and Lisa stopped teasing me. Instead, they ignored me entirely, as if I had become a ghost. The silence was worse than their cruelty. After 3 days of complete isolation, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up my phone and called the one person who had never betrayed me. When Grandma's car pulled into the driveway, I saw Mom and Robert watching from the kitchen window. As I walked out of the house with my backpack over my shoulder, no one tried to stop me. In fact, the expressions on Mom's and Robert's faces were more of relief than anything else. It was a silent surrender, the final confirmation that my presence in this house had always been unwelcome. Life at Grandma's house was completely different. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely, as though the tension and constant struggle for attention had finally been left behind. We ate breakfast together at a small wooden table in the kitchen. Grandma baked pies while I worked on my homework. In evenings, we talked for hours, reminiscing about Dad. She told me stories about his childhood, his dreams, and what he was like when he was my age. These stories brought back fragments of a lost home and warmed my soul. 2 months passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. One morning, Grandma sat me down at the table. Her face was serious, a look I rarely saw. She took my hands in hers and said, "Jennifer, I need to tell you something. I've spoken with your mother. She's decided to relinquish her parental rights." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I want to officially adopt you," Grandma continued. "Of course, the decision is yours. But I want you to know that you've always been like a daughter to me. This is your home, and it would be an honor to be your legal guardian." Tears welled up in my eyes as I threw my arms around her. "Yes, Grandma. Please, yes." The legal process was easier than I expected. Mom signed all the papers without question, without even looking at me. It seemed like this decision brought her as much relief as it did me. The only thing left to do was collect the rest of my belongings from the house. When Grandma and I arrived, no one was home. Dusty boxes containing my things were waiting for me in the garage, like forgotten artifacts from another life. My old room had been completely transformed, the walls painted blue, the ceiling decorated with clouds. Michael's nursery looked as though it had always been there, as though my life in that house had been nothing more than a dream. We loaded the boxes into the car without saying a word. There was no goodbye, no one even tried to see me off. School life after the move changed as well. Emma and Lisa still attended the same school, but we became like two parallel worlds. We passed each other in the hallways without making eye contact. Sometimes I overheard their laughter, their conversations with friends about family trips or weekend plans, but it sounded distant, like the faint hum of a radio playing in another room. Their lives and mine no longer intersected. I threw myself into my studies, deciding to make them my new purpose. Grandma supported me every step of the way, helping with college applications and encouraging me whenever I doubted myself. When the letter arrived from the state university, notifying me of my acceptance along with an offer of a partial scholarship, Grandma was more excited than I was. She beamed, her eyes sparkling as she said, "I have something else to tell you. From the day your father passed away, I started saving money. I wanted you to always have a choice, to be able to move forward." The amount she had saved shocked me. Even with the scholarship, it was enough to cover years of education. We decided to save most of the funds for the future, graduate school, or perhaps the start of my own life after college. The first years at university were a time of change. I called Grandma every Sunday, and during holidays I always returned home, where I felt truly happy. Slowly, I began building my own life, finding my own path. Mom, Robert, and their perfect family became distant memories, like characters from an old book I had once read and forgotten on a dusty shelf. The phone call came near the end of my final semester of high school. I was preparing for my final exams when I heard Grandma's weak, barely recognizable voice on the other end of the line. "Jennifer, sweetheart," she said. "The doctors found something. Nothing serious, but they want to keep an eye on it." I barely held back tears. After that call, I started going home every weekend. With each visit, Grandma seemed a little more tired, but her spirit remained as strong as ever. Even when surrounded by hospital equipment, she insisted I not miss my classes. "I didn't save that money for you to become a nurse for an old woman. You need to study, Jennifer." I tried to argue, but her resolve was unwavering. Grandma didn't want me to sacrifice my dreams for her. Graduation day arrived sooner than I expected. Grandma could no longer attend in person, but we set up a live stream on her smartphone. When I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I looked into the camera and blew her a kiss. Later, she told me she cried through the entire ceremony. After the ceremony, I went straight to the hospital. I spent the rest of the week by her bedside, barely leaving her side. We talked about everything, about Dad, about her childhood, about how she hoped I would build my future. These conversations became our last. One morning, as I held her hand, Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep. Planning the funeral felt surreal. The home where we had shared breakfasts just weeks ago was now a place for choosing flowers and drafting eulogies. On the day of the funeral, I stood alone by the casket, accepting condolences from distant relatives and Grandma's friends. And then they appeared: Mom, Robert, Emma, Lisa, and a boy I barely recognized as my half-brother Michael. 7 years had turned Emma and Lisa into young women, and Michael, whom I remembered as a baby, was now a school-aged boy in a black suit. They looked like strangers, like characters from another life. The ceremony passed in a haze. Afterward, I suddenly heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jennifer," Mom said quietly, her eyes red from tears. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Margaret was a wonderful woman. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "Listen," she continued, nervously wringing her hands. "I know it's been a long time, but would you have dinner with us? We all want to try to make things right." I looked at her face, now lined with wrinkles from age and, perhaps, regret. The words I had longed to hear for so many years now hung in the air, too late, too painful. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice strained. A week later, I met with Grandma's lawyer. She had left everything to me: the house, her savings, even small family heirlooms. It was an overwhelming reminder of her love and dedication to me. I spent a long time thinking about what to do next. Perhaps it was time to face the past. When I returned to the house where I had grown up, it seemed strangely small. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, a shadow of what it had once been. Inside, Robert, Emma, Lisa, and Michael sat around the dining table. An awkward silence filled the room, broken only by the clinking of utensils. "What are your plans now that you've graduated?" Mom finally asked, trying to sound cheerful and casual, though her voice betrayed an undertone of anxiety and uncertainty. I looked up, feeling the weight of all the past years, all the words that had gone unsaid. I slowly sipped my water, giving myself time before answering her question. "I'm staying in town. Actually, I'm going to live in Grandma's house." For a moment, a flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. I caught the expression but couldn't quite understand why it unsettled me. Something about that look made me pause, though I couldn't yet put my finger on it. After graduating from college, my degree in business administration allowed me to secure a position as a junior manager at Wilson & Associates. The salary was more than I could have imagined when I first entered university. And with Grandma's house saving me from paying rent, I was able to set aside a significant portion of my income. Life seemed to be finding its footing. Mom started visiting me more frequently. She usually brought something homemade, fresh cookies or a casserole. Our first meetings were awkward, filled with long pauses and cautious phrases. But gradually, she began to open up. Sometimes she would complain about bills that were hard to pay or how quickly Michael was growing and how he constantly needed new shoes. The first time I offered to help, it was almost automatic. She mentioned a leaky faucet they couldn't afford to fix. "I've got a bit of extra money," I said, pulling $200 out of my wallet. Her face lit up with such gratitude that I felt a warm glow deep in my chest. From that moment on, small gestures like that became routine for us. A couple of hundred for a repair, a little extra for Michael's school supplies, and each time, I saw her face brighten with joy. Then Emma and Lisa started coming around. They talked about their jobs, Emma had become a secretary in an office, and Lisa worked in retail. Their conversations were surprisingly simple and sincere, without a trace of the arrogance they had shown me in childhood. It felt strange, but there was a vulnerability in their voices that I hadn't known before. When Mom mentioned that Michael needed a laptop for school, I didn't even hesitate. After buying it, I watched his face light up with a big smile. "You're the best big sister in the world," he said, hugging me tightly. It was our first real hug. The real breakthrough came during a business trip I had to New York. Emma and Lisa found out about it and asked if they could come along. I hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect, but their enthusiasm was contagious. "We've never been anywhere," Lisa admitted. "Dad always said we couldn't afford it." I booked them economy tickets and found a decent tourist-class hotel in Manhattan. Watching their reactions to New York, I suddenly saw the city through new eyes. They gasped at the skyscrapers, snapped pictures of everything, marveled at store displays, and couldn't stop gushing about how amazing everything was. That evening, while we were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, Emma raised her glass of house wine. "To family," she said. And for the first time, the word didn't feel foreign to me. In that moment, I felt that maybe the past didn't hold as much power over us anymore. After the trip, our family dinners became a small tradition. We chose affordable restaurants, always mindful of the budget. Emma and Lisa seemed genuinely grateful for every moment, no matter how simple it was. One ordinary Tuesday, I got a call from Mom. I picked up, expecting her usual tone. Instead, her voice sounded anxious. "Jennifer, sweetheart, we need to talk," she began, then fell silent, as if gathering the courage to say something important. My hand tightened around the phone. I sat at the table, surrounded by people who now seemed like strangers to me. They were skilled in their performance. Mom filled my plate with lasagna, smiling so warmly that it became difficult not to fall for her act. Emma and Lisa chatted animatedly about their latest successes at work, while Michael, that sweet boy, looked at me with such admiration that I felt a lump rise in my throat. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. "How's work going, sweetheart?" Mom asked, pouring more water into my glass. "You must be working so hard. We're all so proud of you." "It's fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just wrapping up a big project." "Good girl," she said, and I noticed Robert give her a slight nod, as if approving her words. Dinner continued, but I could barely hear their voices. Everything felt distant, as if I were watching a scene from a play, where I was merely an observer. I couldn't stop replaying the words I had overheard yesterday: lower her guard, build trust, her money, her house. Each time one of them said something kind, it resonated in my mind like a sour note, out of tune with the rest of the performance. "We're so glad you've been spending more time with us," Lisa said, her smile almost genuine. "Almost." "Yes," Emma chimed in. "Do you remember that trip to New York? That was the best vacation of my life. Thank you again for that." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. There was a faint note of expectation in their voices. They were hoping I would offer something generous again. But now I knew the truth. "Jennifer," Mom said, leaning in closer, her voice warm but tinged with artificial sweetness. "Michael needs a new coat. Winter's coming soon. Maybe you could help? It's such a small thing, but you know how hard things are right now." I held my breath and pretended to consider her words. All their eyes were fixed on me. Even Robert had put down his fork, waiting for my response. Michael quietly played with his food, clearly unaware of the subtext of the conversation. "Of course, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone as even as possible. "We can go to the store tomorrow and pick something out." "My treat." "Oh, sweetheart, you're an angel," she said, patting my hand. I don't know what we'd do without you. The dinner continued, but I could no longer hear their conversations. One thought pulsed in my mind: how far are they willing to go? When dinner finally ended, Mom hugged me goodbye. Her hand lingered on my back just a moment longer than usual, as if she were trying to convince me of her sincerity. "Take care of yourself, sweetheart," she said, looking into my eyes. "We all love you so much." I nodded, forcing a weak smile, but said nothing. When I got into my car and sat in the driveway for a few minutes, staring at the darkened windows of their house, I felt an overwhelming sense of estrangement. This place, which had once been my home, now felt alien, filled with shadows of the past and lies of the present. The next morning, I went to the office, but working was almost impossible. I couldn't get their voices or their laughter out of my head. These people, the ones I had once considered family, were playing me, manipulating me for their own benefit. All day, I thought about what to do. Finally, during my lunch break, I picked up my phone and called my attorney. "Mr. Rowland," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to discuss the possibility of transferring ownership." "Yes, I mean the house. And my savings as well." I ended the call feeling a sense of relief. It was the first step. Now I needed to figure out how to play my hand. My family, if I could even call them that, thought I was blind to their plans. But they had underestimated me. That night, I received another text from Mom. "Thank you for dinner, sweetheart. You're our light. See you tomorrow." I stared at the screen, at the words that would have once made me smile. Now they felt hollow. I typed a short response: "Of course, Mom. See you tomorrow." But this time, I knew I was playing by my own rules. At dinner the next day, I watched them from across the table, like an audience member at a theater performance. Every smile, every movement, even the smallest gestures, were carefully choreographed. I saw Mom play her usual role of the caring hostess, adding another portion of lasagna to Michael's plate, dabbing the corners of his mouth with a napkin, and looking at me with a strained warmth. Robert sat across from me, seemingly biding his time to speak. Emma and Lisa exchanged meaningless remarks, as if trying to fill the silence. When dessert was served, Mom cleared her throat. "Jennifer, sweetheart," she began in her usual tone, drawing out the words as if she were about to say something particularly important. "We wanted to talk to you about something serious." I silently set my dessert plate aside, watching as she reached for Robert's hand. Their familiar signal: a serious conversation was coming. "There have been some structural issues with the house," Robert added, trying to sound paternal. "The foundation needs repairs. We've gotten some estimates. It'll cost about $10,000, Mom finished, her eyes widening with hope. "We feel terrible asking, but, since you're doing so well." She smiled, looking up at me. That look was like a key in a jammed lock, as if she were certain I would give in. I smiled back, and I saw a flicker of triumph flash in her eyes. "No," I said, making sure my voice was as steady as possible. Mom's smile faltered. "No," she repeated, as if the word was completely foreign to her. "No, Mom. Not $10,000. Not $10. Not one more cent," I repeated. Emma and Lisa exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes filled with confusion. Robert stiffened, sitting up straighter in his chair. "But, sweetheart," Mom began, her voice trembling. "We really need—" I raised my hand to stop her. "You forgot to hang up the phone yesterday, Mom," I said, my tone calm, almost matter-of-fact. The blood drained from her face. Emma and Lisa froze, and even Michael stopped fidgeting with his dessert and stared at me. "After you asked for the $200, I heard everything. About how tired you were of pretending to love me. About how all of you were playing me for my money. About how you think I'm as stupid as my father was. Jennifer, it was just a joke, Lisa started, but her voice wavered. We didn't mean. A joke? I repeated, fixing my eyes on her. The only thing I misunderstood was thinking that you changed. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Jennifer, sweetheart, her voice was almost pleading. You showed me who you really are, Mom, I said, standing up from the table. All of you. And now I can stop wasting my time trying to build a relationship with people who only see me as a wallet. I grabbed my bag and walked out, ignoring their protests and attempts to stop me. Behind me, I could hear Mom calling my name, but I didn't look back. That was the last time I ever set foot in that house. That night, my phone notifications lit up endlessly. First, it was Mom calling, then Robert, then Emma and Lisa. They left voicemails, sent long text messages, apologizing, making excuses, insisting it was just a joke, saying I was overreacting. When I blocked their numbers, they started coming to my house, knocking on the door. Each knock was a reminder that they weren't ready to give up. The next morning, I went to the office and headed straight to my boss Janet's office. Do you remember mentioning the opening at the New York office? I asked. 2 weeks later, I had approval for a transfer. I put Grandma's house up for sale, and it quickly found a buyer. The house was in a great location, and the market worked in my favor. I found an apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side, spacious, with large windows and a view of the park. It was a place where I could start over. In the quiet of the evenings, I thought about them, Mom, Robert, Emma, Lisa, and little Michael. I hoped he would grow up to be different, not like them. But I knew I could no longer be part of their world. I don't regret my decision. Those years taught me that family isn't about blood or legal documents. Family is love, real, genuine, and unconditional.